Welcome to an awesome edition of Rebellion's educational series. I have the brilliant Clemens Wasner with us, who is the chair of the AI in Austria Society. I've been following Clemens now for probably half a decade, and I love his insight. I want to learn about AI in Austria. I love Austria. I'm part Austrian myself, and actually Rebellion reported on Donawitz, which is a steel region, and the efficiency where they've taken 1,000-person plants and turned them to a point where only 14 are needed to produce the same amount of steel. So automation has already come to Austria, but Austria, like Germany, has a long way to go. So Clemens, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Alex. Pleasure to be on your show.
So first off, how expensive is it to live in Austria? I mean, is this an affordable place for an engineer from Australia or Hong Kong who's considering relocating?
Oh yeah, Jesus, of course. I mean, to give you a little bit of a context, I was living abroad for 10 years. I was 7 years in Tokyo and 3 years in Beijing.
Yeah,
and compared to Tokyo, the rent here is 1/3.
Wow.
When it comes to grocery shopping, it's a little bit cheaper.
Yeah.
Where Tokyo is cheaper is when it comes to eating outside. I don't talk about fancy restaurants, but you know, the daily stuff you have for lunch, bowl of noodles and so on. Yeah. But in average, it's much cheaper. It's incredible.
I have a lot of Ukrainian engineer friends. And so, you know, we've written on Ukraine and how that's an affordable Silicon Valley. But Austria, not to be specific, Austria is a much more beautiful country to me than Ukraine. So the ability to live in Austria over Ukraine, I'd be excited about versus Eastern Europe. So it's a nice living standard, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's an interesting angle because when I returned to Austria 5 years ago in 2016, and what I see since then is that they are now playing this card much more openly, saying that this is a place with a very high quality of life. It's affordable. Plus, you can do tech here. This used to be two different worlds in the communication of the country. It's now more they directly look for startups, especially in the Asian region, to relocate or to open a shop in Austria.
Well, Austria also has better than average finances for a European country while having the safety and comfort of the European zone. And as I pointed out, it's an extremely beautiful country. So unlike an Eastern European country, which may not be as desirable to live in, Austria is tremendous when it comes to some of the most gorgeous places on the entire planet. I mean, you have the lake that floods, which for scuba divers is an absolute dream. So let's talk about specific AI growth. What have you seen on the ground the last few years?
It's probably interesting to look where we're starting from in Austria. I mean, I suppose the main audience of your show is in the United States. And when you say AI in Austria, the first question is probably, do you mean Australia? The second question is, why are you talking about AI in Austria at all? It's actually, when you look at the history from a research side, it's actually quite long. It's going even dating back to Gödel's times with his theorems. The region has always been involved in it. And I think what really kickstarted AI research in Austria and to a larger degree in the DACH area, this means Germany, Switzerland, and Austria, is surely the work of Schmidhuber and Hochreiter on LSTMs. And Hochreiter, he wrote the LSTM paper at the end of the 80s, or no, in the middle of the 90s. He's still active in Austria. And he has this JKU, the university in Linz, this AI lab, which they review NeurIPS papers every couple of years. They present there, so they're really known quantity. I think you had Jan de Kuhn in one of your previous shows.
Yes.
You could say Hochreiter is similar to Jan de Kuhn in that regard. So if you have such a figure, this creates a halo effect for the rest of the country, definitely.
It does indeed. Now, I noticed that the AI Austria Society actually, there was one that was founded as early as 1979. So, you know, your country has definitely embraced AI much earlier than many European countries.
That's actually one common topic that you see across European countries is you always have something called the society ... like AI society, photonic society, and so on. This is typically when the people that conduct research or in fundamentals, they bond together and create normally a society. You have this in almost all European countries. What is a recent phenomena is that you also have, I would say, something for the rest of us. This means the business community and the broader public, and this is where we come into place. And this is now, let's say, a blueprint that is followed by many other European countries. We see this with a growing number of partnerships that we have as, AI Austria is a non-profit, and we see similar non-profits with this business and society angle coming up in Germany, in France, Netherlands, and so on and so on.
Would you say there's a Silicon Valley equivalent area in Austria, or is Vienna the center of technology?
First of all, a Silicon Valley equivalent, no, definitely does not exist. I think this is just if you think of the scale and of the large degree of concentration. What I would say is, I'm not familiar. I'm not sure how familiar you are with the European, let's say, funding, state-backed funding, or let's say EU-backed funding. There are lots of government grants and research grants handed out, and what you can see is that the OECD is making once a year a survey where they look how much is the per province R&D expenditures. Mm-hmm. And Austrian provinces there are in general doing fine. 3 of them definitely in charge, and this is normally Styria. You might not know Styria, but in terms of automotive suppliers, they're a known quantity. Mm-hmm. All around the globe. You have Upper Austria, which is where Hochreiter is active in the JKU Linz, and you have Vienna itself. So I would say they're definitely not Silicon Valley, but you have a certain degree of concentration in these 3. So you have lots of large corporations, you have lots of public funding, and the startup ecosystem that grows around universities and large corporations.
Has the culture of Vienna itself changed because of technology, you think, in the last 10 years?
I think Vienna in that regard is quite progressive. I must even say surprisingly progressive, but this is because, I lived in Tokyo for a long time, and whenever I did something, I need to fill out paper forms and then hand it in and get another paper form. Vienna has this initiative, it's called Digital City Vienna, where they actively engage with the different communities. So they do this for AI, they do this for blockchain, they do this for IoT. And it goes in the direction of labs, of hackathons, or of other formats. So in that regard, Vienna is quite actively playing that card. And with COVID-19, this adoption definitely got speed up. So I wouldn't say, let's put it that way. I wouldn't say that Vienna is anti-technology, or it's rather the opposite is true. It's just, yep.
Sorry, do you see the AI community growing at like a 10% rate, a 50% rate? Can you put any type of numbers behind it? Just off the top of your head, of course. How do you feel from on the ground?
If you look at the AI community, I think there are 2 different aspects we are talking about. On the one hand side, there is this landscape view. We do this similar to many other countries, where you list in logo format which startups in fintech are doing AI, in image recognition, and so on. And there, I would say the growth definitely has reached a plateau, but this is very similar actually to the rest of the world. Yeah. So annual growth rate between 10 and 15%. Okay. What's special here is that there is almost no startup attrition, because friends from Israel recently asked me, so, you always talk about growth, but what about attrition? How many startups go out of business? The fact is almost no one is going out of business. More to that later. And I think where the real growth is happening at the moment is not so much in the startups, but on the early adopter side from corporates and the public sector. This is where most of the hiring takes place at the moment, and now where also larger budgets are freed up for projects.
So do you think that the public sector is leading the private sector right now in terms of AI adoption?
It's a mixed bag. I would say when it comes to custom developments, the public sector is more progressive. Mm-hmm. Why is that the case? let's take you mentioned the city of Vienna before. Let's take this as an example. Vienna has several projects going on. One of them, for example, is similar to what Google Street View is doing,
Yeah.
but they do this for road damage detection and asset management. With asset management in the context of public sector means, is the street sign still there or got it moved during a construction and so on. And they do this already since a couple of years. They also have a assistant. It's called the Vienna bot that has very high uptake and so on. And they also do this for traffic management and so on and so on. And basically, all of this is custom made. It was not that the vendor came to them and said, please buy from us. It was rather they were thinking, how can we improve the city? And then afterwards delved into the project. I think on the private sector side, it's pretty much the opposite in Austria, and to a certain degree also for Germany. The big corporations listen what the vendors are offering, and when they have the choice if they should invest rather in something that is growing their business or creating an entire new business model, or rather improve efficiency, 9 out of 10 times they will go for the improved efficiency. As such, they how to say it, they solve problems that per definition don't scale very well, but that are very safe bets. So you think of image recognition or for visual inspection, like quality failures or predictive maintenance, time series analysis. So the majority of the industry project is still in these fields, at least was in these fields, but we now see a shift to sectors where it's also has a direct impact on the bottom line.
Yep. Now, we've seen Tom Siebel's company C.3.ai take off to a gigantic valuation in the US, and that's using AI for just customer management. And I don't know specifically if it goes much beyond that, but there's efficiency itself is the easiest way for AI to expand and grow in society, as people look to offer services that make it easier for large corporations to do business. So how about taxes? Because I know Ukraine is very excited about their 4% tax rate. What type of tax rate would a young 25-year-old programmer have, or venture capitalists have in Austria?
Taxation is, if you include social insurance, which is mandatory, it's quite high.
Okay.
It caps out at around 48%. And the thing is, you also reached it quite early on already. So
that's pretty equivalent to the US, where we're high 40s, low 50s right now in terms of taxation.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference is the way stock grants are treated, because currently there is no easy way to do that. It's all conducted with phantom shares and additional agreements. The lawyers earn a lot with that.
Yeah.
But afterwards you still have to tax it. But this is also something that is tackled currently by the government, and they want to make something like a Austria Limited, which is sort of a combination between the limited that you have already and a small stock listed enterprise. And there's also in discussion that to change the taxation for venture capital.
So let's jump to education. Do you see the universities embracing AI education, and do you see that thusly turning out more AI engineers domestically?
Yes, definitely. But as usual, there's a footnote. You have places like Graz or Linz, where they have established universities already working for a long time on AI. So they double down on AI. What do I mean with that? You can make your BA AI and your master in AI there.
Wow.
Depending on the specialization.
Most American colleges do not do that yet, no.
For the majority of universities, it goes in the direction, however, that you, let's say you're in engineering, and in your master study, you can specialize on simulation. You do finite element analysis, and then you also use deep learning techniques. Same for medical university and so on. So this is rather the blueprint that is used
that's
here.
rather progressive. I love it. That's really fantastic to hear. It's amazing how many very well established, very well respected schools in the US are just taking such a long time to embrace a technology that is really, fast becoming a major part of our society. When I started Rebellion in 2003, AI was still considered, I don't want to say a joke, but unfortunately, it was not respected by much of our society.
That was the same in Austria. I remember I went to the technical university at the beginning of the 2000s in Vienna, and we did the classical algorithm and optimization stuff. And deep learning, I remember the people that were teaching us algorithms were saying, yeah, there was something like deep learning exists, but this is for the weirdos, don't touch it. It will never play a role.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it bites you, this
No.
type of statement.
It's funny. One of the
But I
things
think,
oh, sorry, please go.
yeah, in terms of education, I think of course, you have the Ivy League universities, you have Silicon Valley and so on. But for example, what really struck me when I was in Silicon Valley, I think it was around 2016. Yes, the public universities might be slow and so on, but this is always the case. But the private sector is very fast to pick up. And I remember back then you had from Udacity this autonomous car or autonomous car engineer nano degrees, how they called it.
Mm-hmm.
It was all over the place. And you have stuff like Lambda School from Austin Allred. So this type of private institutions you do not have in Europe typically, especially not in the German speaking countries.
Yeah.
This is again a regulation thing. So, something's got to give.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation so far. Before we conclude, are there any points or issues you'd like to bring up?
I think what I moderately dived into, what are Austrian AI companies actually doing? I mean, you have quite a number of talent, depending on the reports. It's like per capita in the top 5 in Europe, but what are they actually doing? And I think what sets Austria apart from the rest of Europe, especially from the United States, I say this in a neutral way, it's neither positive nor negative. I mean, first of all, most companies that do AI associate themselves much closer with the industry they're operating in than with AI itself. So I talked about manufacturing, for example, before. Companies that apply deep learning techniques in manufacturing think of themselves as manufacturing optimization companies and not as tech or AI companies. So the mindset is very different. And the second big aspect is companies here are very eager to generate services revenue in addition to product revenue out from software as a service or licensing. Mm-hmm. And I think this is one of the reasons why there's so little startup attrition here, because if you have services, it's quite difficult to actually go out of business because you will always find the next project to work on. You might have to slim down, but that's the way things are. But additionally, it makes it very difficult to grow a real business, or let's say to build a scalable business.
You mentioned slim down. During COVID, did you see in Austria what the US saw, a flight from the cities to the countryside?
No, definitely not in the same level. Well, let's say, actually, it's funny that you mentioned it. I just saw in the morning a statistic that was saying in the US, like 2% of the people change state each year, whereas in Europe, it's like 0.1% of the people. So this is a tiny portion. COVID had so far in countries like Austria or Germany, where you have a very, let's say, big government grant schemes, not that much of an impact on the tax scene so far, because the government grants are quite significant here. So the average startup will get around 150 or 300K government grant if they do a research project. And this can, let's say, soften the blow that you get from COVID.
No, that's really, I mean, how many of these government grants are given out? Because I mean, that's something that could really appeal to entrepreneurs around the world to move to Austria.
It actually is. I mean, of course, there are always strings attached. But for example, I heard from German startups, and we even have now Hong Kong startups that are coming here to open a shop here, not necessarily move the headquarter here, but at least have an office and engineers here. There are quite some. I mean, you normally have it on a regional level, means city of Vienna, Upper Austria, Tyrol, and so on. They will offer you to relocate here on a project basis or company basis. Then you have institutions, some of them even date back to the Marshall Plan after World War II. Wow. These are still the same grants that can be between 200K and even 600K. Yeah, plus on top of that, you then have the EU grant scheme. So yeah, it's a lot. Of course, it's a lot of red tape as well. But if you play it well, I think it can definitely make a difference. We, especially for Eastern European startups, we often see that they, after a certain time, put part of their offices in Austria because of that situation.
Will AI eventually become the asset that becomes the mecca for kind of the technological movement towards Austria? I mean, your country is really well positioned here. It's a beautiful country with a deep, rich history and a fantastic educational apparatus. Some of the best schools in the world are in Austria. So the future is obviously very bright for Austria, and that's why I was so excited to have you on, Clemens. And you've been a fantastic guest. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks a lot for having me.
The pleasure was all mine, and I think this will be a valuable resource for students for years to come. Clemens, stay safe during these crazy times.
Yeah, you too, and live long and prosper.